Discuss this with Tom Porteous. He is the Deputy Program Director at Human Rights Watch, an international organization that defends the rights of people worldwide.
The problem is that there isn't the political will in a few European member states to make it work, but it certainly makes sense to have a more equitable sharing of asylum seekers throughout the Union. At the moment, most of the asylum seekers are arriving in Italy, in Greece, in Spain, in the southern states, which are closest to the Mediterranean, and they're therefore bearing the brunt of this crisis. And it's surely up to the largely wealthier northern Europeans to take their share.
Let me ask you about the smugglers, attacking the smugglers, going after that aspect of it. This seems to be a big piece of this puzzle. Is that the correct approach?
I think the approach needs to be more focused on the humanitarian and rights needs of the asylum seekers, and less on security and national security and issues like that. Having said that, they're going to go after the smugglers. It's very important that they do that in a way that is compliant with international norms, particularly the European Convention on Human Rights. It's also important, of course, that when they do attack the smugglers, they don't, cause what they call collateral damage with the, as far as human lives are concerned, especially the lives of these desperate migrants.
One element of this story that I haven't seen covered that much, and I did see a story on it today, and I'd like you to talk about it, is the human suffering element, not from a standpoint of the suffering stuck out at sea, but the psychological damage. There was a fisherman who fished people out, and he said that the flashbacks of seeing babies and children drowning, that he can't shake that from him. And you hear from some of the migrants who survived who are also talking about this. Talk to me about that human dimension, if you will.
You're at the mercy of sometimes of traffickers, of starvation, of crossing deserts. And then, of course, you arrive on the shores of the Mediterranean. You're desperate to get across because life in Libya at the moment is awful. I mean, Libya is in a full-scale armed conflict, and that's a jumping-off point for many of these migrants who are trying to cross the Mediterranean. And then the journey itself, as you mentioned, some of the horrific stories that have come out of that, quite apart from the hundreds who've died, for the survivors, it's been a very traumatic experience.
Let's talk about the Asian migrant situation, because, again, I saw another story where these guys did come to the aid of these migrants, and the government wasn't too happy about it, and they warned them in the future, turn them away.
The Europeans, the Australians, the US, who might be in normally in some sort of position to bring pressure and leverage to bear on these Asian countries who are turning back asylum seekers, they have no moral authority to speak on this issue, because Australia, the EU, and the US, albeit to a slightly less extent, but they're also using extremely callous policies and measures in order to prevent asylum seekers from accessing asylum in their countries. So there's really no country in the world that can speak with moral authority on this issue, except perhaps for some of the frontline states, for example, the states around Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, which have accepted large numbers of refugees. And I think that the thing is that the Europeans and the Americans and others need to think very clearly about what happens if they don't take more of a share of these asylum seekers who are currently being, washing up in countries like Lebanon, which is already overwhelmed. We're going to see more crises, and more crises are going to mean more refugees.